I wanted a way to define MCP servers a single time. I wanted a way to define agents a single time. And I wanted a way to connect all of those. And I wanted this all to happen in the cloud in containers.
Welcome, folks, to First Loop Demo Day, where Cody and I bring you to the cutting edge. Today, Cody is going to be walking us through the agent platform that he is working on, and we'll jump right in. Turn it over to you, Cody.
Cool. Yeah, so I've been working on a little cloud-based agent platform. Basically, the cliff notes are, I just wanted a way to define MCP servers a single time. I wanted a way to define agents a single time. And I wanted a way to connect all of those kind of arbitrarily as I pleased. And I wanted this all to happen in the cloud in containers. So kind of a big gripe I have with a lot of the CLI coding tools out there today is that you need to be kind of on your computer where you've got context either through MCPs you've installed in a specific project or just source code or files on your computer. And there are certain tasks that I find Claude Code, for example, really good at that I would rather just be able to kick off kind of in its own container with a baked-in system prompt with very specific MCPs without having to go through all the overhead of setting that up locally. And folks that listen to this podcast might be familiar with the MCP client that Jake has walked us through, and you might be thinking this is very similar to that. And in some ways it is. This is conceptually similar, but really the main difference is that it is all running in the cloud in fully containerized environments. Part of the idea there is, I like to run a lot. I spend a lot of time just kind of walking in the woods or just being away from my computer. And I have ideas that pop into my mind that I want to take action on immediately rather than just recording, for example, a voice transcription with Super Whisper and either saving it in notes locally or having to go through a bunch of applications such as GitHub to create an issue and assign it to Copilot. I really just want to be able to dump a bunch of context into an agent that I have that is already defined and kind of battle tested so that I can just kick that off with minimal effort. This is also kind of an adjacent exploration to some of the Claude Code containerization demos that I've been posting on YouTube and X, where it's a bit more of a security-minded approach where we are tightly controlling the execution environment and the precise tools and resources that Claude Code has access to. So if you watched those, you've seen how I've deployed Claude Code in a Railway container. I've also deployed it on a VM in Azure and tightly controlled its permissions through RBAC roles. So it's kind of similar in that way of just fully separating the environment of the agent and tightly controlling what it all has permission to do. So I'll just kind of just start by walking through what this platform looks like. It's very lightweight UI. So I've just kind of got a Next.js full stack app here that lets me define either MCP servers or agents. And if we actually go into the settings, we can see that I can connect secrets for MCP servers. So in this case, I've got a GitHub pat, and I can just make any arbitrary connections to agent platforms. So right now, all this supports is Claude Code through either an API key or OAuth token. But in theory, we could make this connection with any CLI or really just any agent platform that we would choose to use. So just diving into the actual MCP server definitions, this is very basic UI. More or less, it mirrors what you would see in the MCP spec for just defining the different servers. So this supports either HTTP or standard IO transport types. We can use Bun as the runtime, HTTP for those remote servers. And if you've ever configured an MCP server in Claude Code or Claude Desktop or any of those applications, this is going to be very familiar. Kind of the nice thing though is once I've got this GitHub MCP defined, I can now just use it in any arbitrary agent. So if I jump over to the agents view, defining an agent is a lot like maybe defining an agent in Claude Code locally. So really, I can just connect this to any agent platform, give it a name, and then the system prompt is what ultimately drives the behavior of the agent. So I'll click into an example here. I've got this GitHub issue maker agent for a very specific repository that contains a client project. So the actual system prompt is pretty lightweight here. It just says, here's the repo you're working in. You've got access to the GitHub MCP, and your kind of sole job is to investigate the contents of the repo by fetching files and whatnot over the MCP and ultimately creating issues. Down here, you can see I've just connected that GitHub MCP. Again, this is just kind of demonstrates the reusability of those MCP server definitions. So running this is just as simple as plugging in a prompt. So in my example of maybe I'm out on a run or whatever, I can just pull up this web app and type in kind of what I'm thinking here, or use Super Whisper to describe an issue. And kind of my common workflow for this specific agent is I've got a specific bug in mind, or maybe there's a unit test gap that I'm aware of, or just a general idea of how to improve something. I might use just Super Whisper to dictate a prompt here and more or less instruct the agent what to do. So if we click into some of these historical runs, you really just kind of get a view of what you might see a Claude code doing if you were to run it locally. So in this specific example, I was asking it to investigate a bug, and it kind of just goes off to the races, uses all the available tools. Again, this is running entirely in a containerized environment. Right now, that's just using Kubernetes K3s nodes to basically run this. So we've just got a Docker image that comes pre-installed with Bun and also the Claude Code SDK. And it will just preload all the essentials to actually run Claude Code. So it'll like take that OAuth token from the agent platform connection and basically just set up the full necessary execution environment and in that container, and then kick it off. And these logs just kind of stream back from that container. What's kind of interesting is, if we scroll down here, we can see that it created an issue. Now, this isn't actually really a chat interface, so I'm not able to go back and forth with the agent to iterate on the specific conversation. However, kind of how I'm thinking about approaching this is every time I run an agent, there's going to be some kind of artifact produced by that agent that is going to contain all the necessary context that it should need moving forward. So in this specific case, it had some mistakes or missed some context in the issue it created. So I was able to just basically paste that issue link back in to a new agent run and say, hey, here's an issue that you created. There were X, Y, and Z problems with it. Please go back and revise that issue. And so this kind of works around the issues of containerization, especially in those ephemeral containers where, once Claude Code runs and returns and that container spins down, we've kind of lost all the intermediate context of it talking to itself, which isn't actually necessarily a problem. We think about how you might use Claude Code to interact with a code repository on your developer machine. You're not generally maintaining one long-lived conversation or session there. You're kind of iterating on artifacts, which are just your source code files and your repository. And you can spin up a new conversation, and assuming your system prompt, or I guess in the case of a repo, your claude.md file is up to date, then whatever context exists in the repo along with those high-level instructions should be sufficient to kind of just pick up a new task. But yeah, that's kind of the high level here. Again, this runs all in the cloud. The goal is to just make Claude Code accessible in all these various contexts through MCP, just in a fully isolated environment that isn't a GitHub action or a very specific VM or container that I have to worry about connecting to. So fully intended to be just a lightweight way to make these reusable agents that kind of have a living context through MCP servers, whatever those might be. So yeah, that's kind of it there. Any thoughts or questions on that, Jake?
Yeah, the I think the decision to not persist the intermediate messages is really interesting. I think there's like a good argument both directions of it's useful or it's not, but I think it's worth exploring the benefits of not. The one of the first things that one of the first items that comes to mind with that is it standardizes all of the agents into input, agent action, output. So you could have Codex, you could have open code or Claude code all run and fit into that paradigm. And because you're like just getting rid of the middle messy messages, like you can just avoid a whole bunch of like schema complexity of trying to standardize all that.
Yeah, that's actually something I hadn't really considered. And I kind of like that framing of, especially until we have some sort of agents SDK from Vercel.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really just busy work, and maybe even could become redundant of trying to persist all of that state and make it interchangeable depending on which agent platform is being used. Especially because kind of down the line, something that I want to do is investigate the A2A protocol and figure out,
Mm,
okay, we've got all these agents defined in this platform that are, maybe they all do kind of specific tasks. Why shouldn't they be able to discover each other and delegate work to each other? And in that case, I guess you could just pipe in the full conversation from a previous agent and just have it embedded as context. But, some of these runs, if we click in and go to the bottom, you can see 38 turns. That's going to be a lot
wow.
of that's going to be a lot of context that just gets plugged into the next agent. And if we start to conceptualize agents as specific workers or employees, then you can kind of see where that starts to break down. If you've got people focused on specific roles in an organization, generally they aren't going to be sharing their full thought process with each other.
Yeah.
Where it almost becomes just the transfer of artifacts. Like, hey, hey, I'm working on this thing. Here's what I've produced so far. Can you fact check it? We don't need we don't need the exact chain of thought that led an agent to a result if we're just, using that as context for another agent to perform some sort of auxiliary task related to it.
Yeah. It makes me think of we've talked about this in prior episodes of just pushing everything into source code. And this kind of fits that paradigm of the conversations are almost additional knowledge that are getting stored outside of source control then. But, really every artifact should. And if you make every artifact fully self-documenting, then
Right.
it puts a little bit more pressure on shaping the output correctly. But then everything is standalone. It makes the rest of the ecosystem work together more smooth.
Exactly. And it saves money. In this specific case with the Claude Code OAuth token, we're not too worried about it because this is just using tokens against our max subscriptions. But especially in cases where maybe you have to use an API key, maybe these agents become shareable across an entire organization. You probably can't be using Claude Code OAuth tokens. Really being crisp on what an agent does and what it produces that is usable for other agents is going to save quite a few tokens along the way. And
Yeah.
I think we're still in an age where maybe folks aren't very concerned about that or aren't thinking about it as much. We're just kind of in the habit of let's give it all the information possible. And
Yeah.
folks probably are starting to learn, and I know many are, that you have to be a bit more dialed on what you're actually exposing to each agent. Because yeah, I mean, if I think about all the tool calls that were made here, they really don't even matter. And if they do matter, maybe we need to condense that down a little bit. If we start thinking of like, okay, do we really need to see how it accessed all these different files and thought through them, or do we just need some sort of ledger at the end that says here are the files that I referenced, and maybe that's good enough. And again, we're focusing on the specific that becomes an artifact as well of just here's kind of a condensed version of what I did,
Yeah,
and you can
that
still
summary.
preserve some of that.
On the MCP taking up context, I feel like that's been the part of the chatter on Techie or Software Development X. Like everyone's just talking about how deleting all the MCP servers they have configured in Cloud Code like makes it work better. It's like,
Yeah,
yeah, obviously you freed up 20% of the context that you were just
yeah,
burning on MCP servers.
oh yeah.
Um,
I mean, you look at if you click in here, you can actually see all the tools that are available. I mean, this is the GitHub MCP
wow,
tool
that is
list just by
crazy.
default. And that's kind of part of the idea of this containerization is there might on my personal machine, for example, I might have globally installed MCP servers that are tightly coupled just to my own development
Yeah,
processes. And my understanding is that no matter how you really run Cloud Code on your local machine, it can pull in it pulls in those user level MCPs every
yeah, I think
time. Is
so.
that right?
Yeah, I believe so.
So I think that's another benefit of containerization, just looking specifically at the MCP tool context stuff is I don't, this is a very, I should probably even curate this list a little bit because we're specifically, we're using the create issue or modify issue,
Yeah. Like you're never going to
git
use this to
issue.
create a repository or like fork a
Right.
repository. Like those tools just don't need to be there.
Right. And I mean, the access token, the personal access token that I've configured this MCP with doesn't even have permission to do probably 90% of these things. It's just, it is very scoped. So there's
I
probably,
did, sorry to cut you off. I saw the GitHub CLI agent released, and it said it comes like pre with the GitHub MCP pre-baked, and just a bunch of people like complaining about that. It's like, no, we don't want that pre-baked. Like you are taking up 30 or 20% of our context right out of the gate. Like get
right.
it out of there. And seeing these tools, like that makes a lot more sense. I didn't realize there's that many in the GitHub MCP.
Yeah. And I'll give them some credit if you use the standard IO version of this GitHub MCP server. There are additional flags you can specify at runtime that allow you to kind of
Mm,
toggle some of these on and off. I don't think that that's yet possible through the HTTP MCP server,
interesting.
which is kind of unfortunate. Maybe there's some headers or something that I've missed in the documentation that lets you turn some of these on and off. But yeah, I mean, if you think about all of these 119 tools minus, let's say there's 100 GitHub MCP tools, you're getting all of the input parameters for each of the tools in the context. There's
Yeah.
probably detailed descriptions for what each one of these does. I haven't actually looked to see what the total token consumption is, but it's going to be huge. But yeah, kind of getting back to my main point is if I am running Claude code in my on my developer machine, and sometimes I want those user level MCPs that I use in literally every single project or instance of Claude Code. However, I also just don't like the overhead of if I want to scope any of those to a specific project, now I've got to go in and create a dedicated configuration file. And, for example, if I want the GitHub MCP in all of our repos, if we include all of our private first loop repositories, that's like 30 or 25, something like that the last time I checked. So that's just a lot of duplicated MCP configuration as well. And
Yeah.
even sometimes I don't want, in the context of a specific project, a given MCP server either, or sometimes I only want it some of the time. So that's kind of the idea here as well. And I think that there's quite a bit of overlap there with some of the local MCP client stuff that you've worked on, you still get kind of that level of control.
Yeah, I think that kind of like we're exploring different areas, but we're kind of circling around the same problems of these agents are really powerful, but how do you make them more reusable across different use cases? Because there's
Yep.
such a benefit to like defining the tools, the prompts, even like the slash commands. Like the more you can dial that all in for a specific use case, the better it's going to perform. But there's just not good support for generalizing that right now.
Right. Yeah. And maybe they'll get there. Although, the Cloud Code team seems more focused on other areas right now, which is totally fine. I love seeing all the innovation that comes
Yeah.
out there. And a lot of these problems are probably much lower on their priority list. And maybe we'll see improvements in a couple years when some of the real innovation starts to slow down.
Yeah, we'll see. They did rename the Claude Code SDK to be the Claude Agent SDK. So I wonder if they are gonna put more energy towards
Interesting.
supporting the different agent use cases.
I missed that. And it pretty much, maybe it's just a branding thing, but it really is a general agent already,
Yeah.
especially when you use it through the SDK, because you can just override system prompts. Like in this specific case, this system prompt is going to replace whatever Claude code comes pre-baked with. And
Yep.
I'm sure there's a lot of very developer specific instructions there, and maybe some things that aren't even going to be relevant. This is a coding agent ultimately. It's more focused on just interfacing with a specific GitHub repo and collecting context and then creating issues. So I don't know actually what's in the Claude code system prompt. I don't know if that's publicly documented anywhere. But if there's any, for example, any instructions on doing low file system operations or running certain grep commands against files on your local file system, none of that is very relevant here because it is strictly
Yeah.
just using the GitHub MCP. So at that point, once you override the system prompt in Cloud Code with your own custom system prompt, it's now just tools in a loop, really, with some computer use tools, and that's about it. So I don't know why it wouldn't just be or the Cloud Agent SDK at that point.
Yeah. I totally agree with that. One more question for you from me. How are you thinking about the agent to agent delegation? And is there a way where you can, given that you've created this data mission GitHub issue maker, are you going to add like an abstraction over that to where you could send an email or text or something to trigger this off? Or you think it's always going to be through this UI? And I guess I'm asking because I'm curious about what's what's the abstraction for kicking off different agent tasks, and then can we add different entry points? Thinking about the voice experimentation I was doing earlier today.
Yeah. So I guess for the agent to agent stuff, I do want to explore the actual protocol there. I don't know if there's a ton of implementation examples for it yet. Some of the stuff I've seen seems to be specifically around kind of using that protocol within larger, just agent studio products out there, like I believe Google offers one and kind of abstracts that all away. So I don't know exactly how that's going to work yet. I do want to follow the protocol and basically just make it so that I can either just say, all right, this agent has access to any agent in the entire platform and can just delegate to them on command, or if there's specific relationships that I want to control for, just allowing that to be specified in the platform to kind of drill down on the specific agent to agent communication that I actually want. In terms of additional abstractions on top of this, I haven't really thought about that yet. I think you could get into some interesting things. I know you're using the real time kind of phone API stuff
Yeah,
that OpenAI has released. So you could get into some interesting things there where maybe you literally just have what's the right word? Maybe you just literally have a gateway agent that you can call and it will handle the discovery of any agent on the platform for you just to make that really streamlined. I could totally see something like that being useful. I'll probably stick just with the kind of basic UI here for now until I figure out exactly all the use cases I plan to use this for. But I totally see that being useful. I really like having that kind of core agent that's really lightweight that just has the knowledge of all the other agents and can invoke them kind of on demand for you and handle the selection, I guess. You think of model
Yeah.
selection like ChatGPT has, kind of becomes the same thing here, just at an agent level instead.
Yep. Yeah, for that, I almost think like you could have, if you had that gateway agent, you can make a phone call and say, "Hey, I have two or three different issues I need to make for the data mission repo. Can you look at that? And then I'm going to give you the first one." You could like iteratively talk through the three issues and then have it all be kicked off and do it in a
Yeah.
hands-free way. And I think that could be pretty neat. Who knows if it's more useful? Like, I think there's a lot of value in like the friction of having to type or input something. So maybe there's pieces that are going to get lost in translation quality wise, either because you don't specify them appropriately over the phone or the gateway agent drops them. But the agent that it's GPT real time is really good. So I'm just curious about that eventual orchestration layer, like to really parallelize the Claudes.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good question. And I haven't got that far yet. I will get there eventually because I do see there being use cases for that, specifically the high level orchestrator agent, as well as just being able to kick off sub agents, much like you can do in Cloud Code today. I haven't admittedly played around with it very much. A lot of the examples I've seen are kind of maybe simplistic in a certain way, where there's like, all
Yeah,
right, here's my tester agent and my linter agent and
I
things like
totally agree
that.
with that. It feels like nonsense
It's
to me right now.
yeah, it's a lot of that stuff just feels like, okay, why shouldn't my core agent just run tests itself every time and run lint itself every time? If you're collaborating, or if you're collaborating with other software engineers, you're not asking them to write tests for you or run tests for you. It's but maybe there's some value there in the, stripping down the context for those sub
Yeah.
agents. It's not always a one-to-one comparison of humans to agents, just because, they are so overwhelmed by context sometimes and aren't as good as compartmentalizing it like us humans are.
Yeah. A little bit of an aside, but did you see what Cognition, the makers of Devon, posted about the context windows with Claude?
No.
The With Claude 4.5, apparently in their testing, they found that Claude was aware of how much context length it had and knew when it was starting to run out of context length. So it's like almost a little bit of
Interesting.
existential self-awareness, and it sounds like it impacts the like performance of the model too, where if it has a lot more room to go, like it produces a better answer. So I think
Interesting.
it's maybe the first signs of like context management getting even more interesting than it already is if the model's aware of what's in context like that.
That is really interesting. So it's just, instead of just hitting the compaction boundary or whatever, like Sonnet 4 did, it can actually see in real time as it's working.
Yeah, that's my understanding. I haven't dug into it too much, but what I read was that as, your 80% of the context windows filled up, the model like recognizes that and will rush to get to a conclusive answer like more aggressively because it's like running out of time.
Interesting. And that, I feel like that kind of circled back to the whole concept of creating agents that produce valuable self-documenting
Yeah.
artifacts as a result. The fact that the model can sense itself degrading says a lot there, and I think is evidence against maintaining those super long running conversations. If you hit a certain point, I guess Claude is just going to do that compaction for you. And I don't know how all that logic works, to be honest. If it just literally takes what you had and tries to condense it down into a summary. And, if you're actually controlling what that summary is or what that goal is, I assume you're going to get a better result than just letting Claude hit that limit on its own.
Yeah.
I would ideally like to have a valuable artifact long, long before Claude starts to run out of room in its context window and needs to do its own compaction.
Yeah.
Just gives us the full control there.
Howdy. All right. Well, anything else you want to highlight here for us?
I think that's pretty much it. I could spend some additional time kind of talking about the containerization and all those topics, but I think I'll save that for the Secure Cloud Code series that
Mm,
I've been publishing on YouTube. So I'll plug that, I guess. If you are
nice.
an enterprise or a larger organization and you're trying to figure out how to avoid just having Cloud Code kind of running unfettered on all of your employees' machines, check out that series. I'm doing kind of a gradually deeper and deeper investigation into all the various ways you can control for that. And this is very much adjacent to some of that content. So definitely check that out.
Perfect. And we'll have to do another episode where you kind of summarize and walk us through each of those pieces then. All right. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. Hope you all have a great day, and we'll catch you next time here on Demo Day by First Loop.